Questions for the Prime Minister?
First question.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in the House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Right. The Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Singapore has been reluctant to participate in condemnation of countries with rampant human rights abuses. How do you justify this?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable opponent obviously does not understand the ramifications that condemnation in the international arena has. Because condemnation sends a strong message to that country that it can never be taken seriously, that its views will never be truly taken into consideration when dealing in matters of international affairs. Therefore, condemnation is actually counterproductive to the cause of the international community, which is to bring countries into the fold and make them more cooperative and more willing to participate in the international process. Therefore, our country does not participate in condemnation, but rather advocates further interaction. And an example of this would be our long-standing close ties to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. This is how we facilitate close ties and therefore encouraging them to move out of their shell and into the broader ambits of the international system. Whereas on your side, your condemnation simply condemns them to being a pariah state forever, never interacting with the international community on a level playing field, and thus has no benefit for international relations whatsoever.
All right. The Shadow Minister for Defence.
On the 7th of February, Indonesia named 2 warships after the McDonald bombers who bombed McDonald House on Orchard Road in 1965. Noting that this increases tension within the region, and in light of Total Defence Day, the Shadow Minister of Foreign Defence would like to ask, what is Singapore going to do about the extremely aggressive neighbours within the region, noting that an increase in defence spending is going to put these neighbours on an aggressive, and not doing anything is just going to show them that Singapore is a pushover and is unable to combat these threats.
Now, the first option for Singapore is, of course, to respond diplomatically. My colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are already corresponding with the Ministry over this issue. We believe that this issue of naming a warship is not one to be solved with use of force, but rather through the talks. But if need be, Singapore's Defence Ministry stands ready to defend Singapore. We will have you know that 38% of our entire government budget goes to promoting the security of Singapore, protecting our citizens. Singapore has one of the highest, if not the highest, defence per capita spending in the entire region. We have our military arm of the Air Force and Navy have superior capabilities in the region, and we have confidence in our ability to defend ourselves from any aggressive action if the need calls for it. In addition, Singapore has invested very heavily in technological developments to always stay one step ahead of our competitors, including a 3G integrated military system. We recognize that military policy must always go hand in hand with diplomatic policy, and that is what protects Singapore, what keeps Singapore safe. So we assure you that the naming of new Indonesian warships, as well as increased defence expenditure, has not gone unnoticed by Singapore. Singapore is working actively to promote military ties with vital allies in the region. Singapore defence is something that we will work very closely on.
Order. Questions for the Prime Minister.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in the House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
The Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, the Republic of Singapore has 3 refugees, not several hundred, which we could easily accommodate given our resources and diplomatic capacity, but 3. Now, these are refugees who are deserving of our assistance, having lived in such adversity. These are refugees who can, like multiple other examples on foreign lands, grow to become beacons of advocacy, or at the very least, a method of raising awareness of deep-set issues, to resolve the very problems that displace them. Now, instead, the government canes these so-called boat people and deports them to the hellholes from whence they came. Even though Singapore is supposed to stand for human rights on the international arena, thereby diminishing our diplomatic status stature in the region. How can the government justify this?
Clearly, the Minister doesn't really understand Singapore's situation because he recognizes that Singapore cannot afford to start taking in refugees. Because what this means, it opens up the floodgates for thousands of refugees to come into Singapore, which is something that Singapore just can't afford, especially concerning the rise of xenophobic sentiments towards foreign workers. We think that the same kind of sentiments will arise should we begin to take in more and more refugees. And we realize by taking in refugees, what it means is that Singapore becomes involved in the conflict from which these refugees originated from. And that's something that Singapore simply can't afford to do because Singapore is already a small island. Singapore is already in a precarious state regarding its safety. And that's why Singapore can't afford to be embroiled in these kinds of conflicts. But we recognize that Singapore does provide aid to these countries in conflict, which shows that Singapore already fulfills its responsibilities on the international arena. And that's why we don't think we have the obligation to take in refugees, because our obligation is first and foremost to our citizens and our country.
Okay.